Hello and welcome to Greenbytes Wednesdays. Greenbytes Wednesdays is a podcast series where we facilitate critical conversations and steer consciousness when it comes to understanding the impact of our digital footprint across Nigeria's technology ecosystem. We hope that with this advanced knowledge, we can introduce you to some tools, trends, and best practices that can enhance your knowledge about digital sustainability. Are you curious about climate change? Are you a tech enthusiast or a climate entrepreneur? Come on board and learn on this episode as we get on with every conversation of the Greenbytes Wednesday podcast series. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Area I under the Scale Initiative, funded by the UK government through the Digital Access Program. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote, and I am glad to be your host. Welcome on board.
Hello and welcome to Greenbytes Wednesday. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote, and it's a privilege to be your host on this episode of the podcast. On Greenbytes Wednesday, we facilitate critical conversations and we try to reflect within you who is listening or watching some of stronger sense of consciousness when it comes to understanding what happens in the digital ecosystem, sort of discovering the tools and the trends when it comes to Nigeria's technology landscape. And it's think of it like a crash course when it comes to digital sustainability as a whole. And it's really, really a privilege to bring you this episode. Feel free to check out other episodes that we've had where we've been talking on various themes when it comes to the digital ecosystem, particularly here in Nigeria. Greenbytes Wednesday is a part of Scale for Net Zero program, and Scale is Smart Climate Awareness, Learning and Empowerment. We're thankful to the UK government for funding this and making it possible for you to learn about the digital ecosystem, but also the intersections with sustainability here in Nigeria. My guest today is AbdulKareem Mojeed. I know him in many ways. He wears many hats, and literally, apart from the one on his head. But he is a journalist. He's been working in the space for nearly a decade. He's been one of the four firms names that you probably come across if you read or consume a lot of materials around climate change, digital sustainability, particularly here in Nigeria. And today we'll be speaking around digital solutions for emission reduction in Nigeria. What are the solutions when it comes to emission reduction? First, we'll start with laying the background as to where do these emissions come from, why do we have these emissions, and then we'll go into the specifics, the solutions, what we need to do, what are some innovations or tools that are helping us to reduce our emissions, what are the key sectors through which Nigeria continues to experience emissions, and what's the level of awareness within the tech community, within the financing community, within the policy space, and how does all of this sync together? And lastly, you, the listener, will get a take from him regarding what is one golden thing, what is one singular thing that you can do to play a part in reducing the emissions that we have as individuals, but also collectively. AbdulKareem Mojeed, it's such a pleasure, such an honor to be having this conversation with you. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Shay. It's a great privilege to be here in your studio to share some thoughts on the issues you just raised.
Welcome. Like I said, it's probably a challenge that when I meet people that I have huge respect for, it's difficult for me to really describe or to read out their profile. So if you had to introduce yourself properly, to do it in a proper way, how would you introduce yourself?
No, I think you've introduced me already. My name is AbdulKareem Mojeed. I'm a journalist with Premium Times newspaper. So at Premium Times, all I do basically, I report issues around the environment, climate change, food security, agriculture. Sometimes I report around politics. Yeah, and the local currency market, but largely the issues that I report on, that I always, that comes to me naturally, are always the issue of climate change. Maybe probably because of my background as a botanist and ecology study. So I sometimes refer to myself as an accidental journalist.
Interesting and really good to have you. Welcome once again.
Yeah, thanks.
So let's start by setting the basis. When it comes to emissions in Nigeria, before we get into reducing emissions, let's talk about emissions itself. Where do these emissions come from? And by that, I'm talking of carbon emissions, or maybe we should start with that. When the average guy out there hears emission, how would you sort of explain to him what emissions are?
Yeah, so basically when they say emission is just the release of gases when you release something into the atmosphere. So we sometimes when you are driving, you see some cars that are oozing out these smokes, and you ask yourself later after a few minutes, you don't get to see some of the smokes. You ask yourself,
There you go.
where did they go to? So our basic science knowledge when we're in school clearly shows that, we talk about the evaporation, just going into the atmosphere and all of that. But over time, as this goes, it keeps accumulating in the atmosphere. It keeps accumulating. There are usually adverse effects
Yeah.
to them. So, and across our various homes, whether we are cooking with firewood, we see smokes. Whether we're cooking with gas or we are in the kitchen frying something, we see smokes.
Yeah.
Whether we are using generators, we see smoke. So, some of the anthropogenic activity that we carry out across our various homes, we release emissions. Also, we see all of this. And even as we breathe, you breathe in, you take in oxygen and you send out carbon dioxide. You're also releasing emission. So it is the process of this emission, discharge across these various, unit, through from these various activities that I've mentioned.
I see.
That we then come to categorize the gases to say, okay, we are releasing greenhouse gas emission.
I see.
So when you talk about the emission, it's just the discharge of these gases.
So why is it a problem? Why should we talk about emissions in the context of climate conversation?
So yeah, thank you so much. The moment as you're releasing this gas, they say to every action in physics, they say to every action that there's an equal and opposite reaction. So over time, aside from the minute, I will say minute, in the sense like the way we drive cars, maybe generators and all of that, we have factories, cement factories, the oil and gas industries that are also, flaring gases, on. In fact, when you go to Port Harcourt, you see a fire burning. They are emitting. So the constant emission of these gases has its impact on the atmosphere, on the ecosystem, where you have the depletion of the ozone layer. And then we talk about weather acid rain. We talk about, just not to make it too complex for
Yes, and not to make it too complex, but there are also gases or emissions that we don't see with our eyes, for example. Maybe methane in the agri sector.
So now when you talk about methane, most times in the agri sector, it comes from, let's say, slaughterhouses. Just to mention a few, you see, when you approach slaughterhouses, the smells you get from slaughterhouses are totally different from what you've been perceiving before arriving at spot.
True.
So you know that pungent smell. It has a unique smell on its own. And then, in chemistry, we are taught, there are some chemicals, there are some, compounds that have unique smell that you use in identifying them. So when you get to slaughterhouse, just like a place where someone is urinating constantly, there's this pungent smell that comes out from there. The moment you get there, say, you understand.
Yes.
So in chemistry, there are some of these smells helps you to also identify the compound that is being released from there. So you talk about the ammonia, the nitrous oxide that is coming out from that spot, and these are parts of what we call the greenhouse gases, causing the heating up of the atmosphere, depletion of the ozone layer per se. But on daily basis, the one we have that is usually being, emitted, like is the carbon dioxide that we all know.
Okay.
But when you want to talk about specific, gases being emitted across the different sectors that we have. Then you now talk about the methane gas.
That's the next question I wanted to ask you. First, to say that you reminded me of my time in the laboratory as a science student myself. But across sector, can you just walk us through some of these sectors? Some of the sectors that we have emissions from.
So I think one that always interests me to talk about is the agri sector, because we know that at least about, if I'm not mistaken, about 70% of the workforce we have in Nigeria, it's usually like the agriculture agri sector. And because agriculture is maybe the sector that provide what we eat, so everyone is making moves.
Yeah.
So when you look at the agri sector, looking at the activities, it's a value chain that, and the action of one activity or the other, you see that it follows each other in a definite sequence. For instance, you want to cultivate maize, you have to clear the land. The process of clearing the land,
Cutting down the tree,
cutting down the trees, and all of that, they all have their own impact. When you now introduce the crop, they started sprouting.
Yeah.
You introduce the pesticide to fight the weed, herbicides and all of that. That's a different ball game again on its own. The chemicals you're introducing, they have their own impact they're having on the environment.
And then post production also.
Likewise, so when you are harvesting, the process of transportation, heavy duty equipment and all of that, there are a whole lot of emission. Talk about the livestock sector.
Yeah.
So there we now talk about the methane gas, the purging, cattle. That's why you see at COP, you see some people say you should go, is it the vegetarian? And I asked them, how do you expect me to live without eating meat?
By the way, COP is the conference of party organized by the UN every year.
Yeah. So when you look at the agri sector on its own, you see that a whole lot of emission is coming out, and that's where people are now trying to advocate for the whole issue of agroforestry, agroecology, sustainable way to agriculture, where you don't where you try to reduce the emission, and also a way of reducing deforestation. Because we know that in the trees, living trees, they are like the natural lungs to the environment that helps to purify.
Absolutely. Forgive me for junking in here. I agree the agri-food and land use, as we call it, the AFOLU sector is very, very key. In fact, it's around 21% of the emission, which is the highest across the sector. But run us through these other sectors, because from here, we need to then move into the part of reducing this emission. So, and what solutions we have, which is the core of our conversation.
Definitely.
But run us through these other sectors very quickly.
So the oil and gas sector.
Yes.
You see that at COP, the conversation is usually that you should stop emission from source. And that the largest polluters are the gas flare emission, the oil producer emissions, and all of that. So you come to realize that, and it also tied to the energy sector.
Okay.
Where, we depend largely on fossil fuel for our energy usage day to day. And that's where they're talking about the just transition and people trying to drive renewable energy. We see countries adopting deals for them to transition by mid-century, another. We saw the deal in Dubai. What happened? Where countries are saying that no, we should transition, but we don't know when. I mean, that's a different conversation in its own.
Yeah.
But you cannot take away the oil and gas sector in terms of the emission. Of course, we can also talk about whether the telecommunication sector, and we can also talk about maybe the transportation sector. So emissions are also going on across this sector. But for me, I always hit more on, let's say, the energy, the power sector, the agriculture sector, because we have a whole large chunk of emission coming out from
Tons of area. Yeah. And if I could add two other sectors, will be waste.
The waste management is why I did mention it. I always sometimes try to rope it, let's say, into whether the agriculture. Of course, the solid waste also comes around the telecommunication sector. The technology. We have e-waste that comes out from there, and they also generate their own, emissions.
Yes.
As the case might be. When you talk about that waste, like I mentioned in the earlier, the issue of the slaughterhouses. I mean, when you see, I mean, sometimes it breaks my heart to talk about the way our slaughterhouses looks like, especially in our NDC. The National Service Foundation, as a signature to the Paris Agreement, yes, we submitted that. And when I read through, I saw one of the ambitious move we want to make is to cut down emission of the methane gas.
Yeah.
And one of the ways to do that for me, I think, look at the numbers of cows we slaughter on daily basis.
Just so we don't delve so much into the agri space, which you're very passionate about. I would have loved to get some thoughts, if you can do it in just 30 seconds, some thoughts around emissions as a result from the digital sector, also the digital space. Talk about cloud computing, data centers. What are your thoughts around that?
So, around the digital space, I do know that most times to power even the sector, we also depend on the fossil fuel. And most times when you talk about digital technology, you want to keep power running always. So, for instance, all the things we're using now, if there is no power, then there's no way we can. So most time we run on some of these big generators and all of that. Telecommunications in Nigeria, if you look at it, the network we're using, you see generators steaming constantly. When there's power outage, the generator kicks. Across the bank sector, you see that for them to function effectively, there's this diesel generator that keeps burning. And because it is part and parcel of us already, most times if we imagine you don't have network for 5 minutes, you know how you feel. You see the telecommunication guys rushing to the different sites to ensure that everything keeps working. So, I keep thinking sometimes that is there a way we can go when you're talking about transitioning, switching to renewable energy, if we have the quantum of maybe solar panel, or is it wind energy or thermal, whatever it is that we need for them to power these various stations effectively and efficiently, so we'll be able to
Cheers. You have in a bit. But let's take a pause. You, the listener, or you who is watching, look at your phone, for example, and how many applications do you have there? Maybe there are 10 or 12 that comes with the phone originally installed. But then you need maybe an additional 20 depending on what you do with your phone. Some for the banks, some for what applications they have on your phone, for example. For editing videos, for social media. So think of all of these applications and think about how each of these applications run, but it's also dependent on some data clouds or sort of data centers. And these data centers are powered by energy, powered by water, and they need to be cooled. And these are also parts of the emissions we're talking about here. But one thing we've established is sort of to make very clear what it means. So when next you hear emissions, you know exactly in what context it's being used. But the big question, which we've sort of answered, is do we need to reduce emission?
So, the answer is yes.
And now let's vocalize it. In Nigeria,
Yeah.
do we need to reduce our emission in Nigeria?
So the answer to it is yes. Okay. Because I see reducing emission as we trying to protect the environment. So in biology, we believe that the environment and the gene makes up an individual. So when there are issues with the environment, when you don't embrace sustainable environmental practices, then you know that we are having issues already. And for us, when we are intentional, deliberate about cutting down our emission, it means that we are having the planet at heart. When you have the planet at heart, the planet invariably will also help to protect, the species, the existing species,
But I asked this question about Nigeria because you're very much aware of these conversations around, oh, we are a developing nation, we're not even emitting enough. And that's why I asked, and I'm asking again, do we, as Nigerians in Nigeria, do we need to be conversant, do we need to be aware of, or sort of, should we should we, as we put it in the present plan, should we send them when we talk about anything
So
reducing emissions?
So again, my answer is yes. And why I'm saying that is simply because we should not look that okay, we are not. I have my reservation with we are not emitting enough. So what do we mean by we are not emitting enough? Trust me, most times the data that we use to quantify whether emission and all of that, we don't even have the technology to give us the exact figure of the quantum of emission that we are even releasing as a country, for instance. Most time it is based on estimates and assumptions. So why are we not also thinking about we making sure that as we are even emitting, we're putting system in place that is erasing that emission by ensuring that our forests are are well protected, by ensuring that our ways of going about our day-to-day activities are environmentally friendly. We are a more sustainable way of with proper waste management and all of that. I don't think there's any crime. My brother, when we were in Baku for the COP, I was looking for where I would see sachet or something dump on the floor, and I didn't see that.
But that's also around infrastructures, right?
You get the point. So are we able to put in place those infrastructures? So yesterday we were having conversation around environmental impact assessments. That it's actually Environmental Impact Assessment Act. So it's actually an act that guides before you come to maybe put your factory here. You carry out this
I thought there was some drama with Dangote refinery.
and all of that. So there are a whole lot of sustainability issues surrounding this, which I feel that as a country and being a party to the Paris Agreement, we should even keep the thought of we are not emitting enough aside, but just do the needful to protect the environment.
Yeah.
Because posterity will judge us.
I agree with you completely, AbdulKareem. I know it's very difficult for people who think of this when it comes to justice. They feel, oh, but these guys have emitted so much and we need to keep up with them. We need to get even close to them before we then think of reducing our emissions. But it shouldn't be a thing of, okay, because you do the wrong thing, then I have to do the wrong thing also. Thank you. The second part of this conversation, we'll get into some of the digital solutions that is helping us to reduce emissions in Nigeria. But I will say very quick thank you to you who's watching or listening. It's the Greenbytes Wednesday, and it's a platform where we have critical conversations that steers within you the consciousness to understand the digital landscape, the ecosystem, and sort of broaden your horizon when it comes to learning about tools, trend, what's happening within the digital space here in Nigeria, but with some references to best practices across the world. Feel free to share this episode with people in your network, and you can find this and many other episodes wherever it is you find podcasts, on Spotify, on YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts. You'll definitely find Greenbytes Wednesday. Thank you for sticking with us. Digital solutions for emission reduction in Nigeria. That's what we've been discussing. My guest has been AbdulKareem Mojeed, and I really, really appreciate how very basic he presented, emissions, what it means. We also talked about the sectors when it comes to emissions, and we answered the very important question: do we need to reduce our emissions, particularly here in Nigeria? And about 4 times he kept saying, yes, we need to. At this part, we'll sort of delve into the how. How do we reduce emissions in Nigeria? And we'll do this specifically. We'll tailor our conversation specifically towards digital solutions that are out there. As you know, the Greenbytes Wednesday will sort of tailor these conversations around digital sustainability. So we'll sort of highlight some of the technology, Nigerian-based technology, or how the tech ecosystem in Nigeria can contribute to more sustainable practices across different sectors. What are some digital solutions that we can celebrate? What are some digital solutions that we can sort of think towards the future? We can have foresight in developing. what are some best practices that you say are out there as digital solutions to help reduce emissions?
Yeah. Thank you so much. So, when you talk about digital technology and all of that towards reducing emission, I know in Nigeria, just as they used to categorize us in the global south, developing countries and least developing countries. I know the tech space is still, evolving.
Yeah.
They're still trying to catch on some of this development. I think that's one of the reasons why the global north, they've been able to pace us, in this regard. But in Nigeria, I think one of the things that we did that was quite interesting is the issuance of the green bond. I know Nigeria issued a green bond, I think in 2017 and 2019, and the proceeds were targeted at cutting down emissions by carrying out some climate smart, development. And, the goal has been that we want to follow the path of green development, as enshrined in the nationally determined contribution document that we submitted to the UNFCCC. And but one of the strategic things they did that the Green Bond did was also to fund project around the renewable energy sector, where I think the Rural Electrification Agency were also trying to install solar panels across about from the project that they about 37 universities. Likewise, another part is the afforestation project.
I've been to the one in Kano, by the way, fantastic project.
Oh, great. So, the afforestation project, but I basically, investigate the afforestation project because in my head, I was like, wow, this should be a model that other African countries should copy.
So are there digital solutions in the afforestation
sector? In the afforestation sector, they were able to map out some communities, per se, to plant some trees.
Okay.
And across Nigeria's the national parks in the country. So the national parks handled that project. I think the Great Green Wall and the likes, they were also having theirs, to address the issue of desertification in this region.
So let's dwell. Sorry for interrupting you, AbdulKareem. Let's dwell on this a little bit. Within the agri space, for example, can we think of? I mean, I don't know if you know, and this conversations is also so we can think about ideas. Someone out there can get inspired to do the the practicalities of things. But can we think of digital technology that can help us sort of weigh, sort of evaluate density of trees in a particular location, the quality of the tree, maybe recommend what species of tree can be better absorb, can absorb carbon a lot more.
Yeah.
Can you sort of, what are your thoughts, like your initial thoughts of when it comes to how digital solutions can help us reduce emissions in the agri sector, a sector you're very passionate in?
So I know there's what they call the climate smart agricultural practices. And one of them is what I mentioned around the agroforestry model, where you plant, in agriculture, sometimes it's not necessarily that you bring one technology, innovations are sometimes referred to as technology, telling people that, look, when you adopt these best practices, it will help you to get XYZ results. So in terms of the goal, in terms of for climate change, they call climate smart agriculture, is to ensure that you carry out sustainable agricultural system where you don't bring in anything that will be causing, emission, in the system.
Yes.
And one of them is the agroforestry, model or that I talk about. So where you encourage tree planting. And the tree planting you talk about, just because we have 6 geopolitical zones in Nigeria. So the trees that can try and blossom well in the south is likely different from the tree based on the pattern of rainfall. So there is what they call data analytics in terms of like that these people make use of. I know the NIMETs,
Okay.
guys, in terms of their
What's the NIMET again? I'll make a fool of myself. But it's the Nigerian Yes.
So so every year during the first quarter of every year they release data that they call it and the seasonal climate prediction. So that helps people to have a sense of what the weather will look like, how long would the dry spell looks like, how long would the rainy season last, and helps farmers to plan along that line. Similarly, we have the agency like the National Emergency, Management Agency. So they take the data from NIMET,
Okay.
to help to plan the disaster risk, assessment from what NIMET has predicted and from what NISA, Nigeria Hydrological, Agency, what they have predicted in terms of the flood outlook of of the country.
And talking about flood outlook, I also discovered recently that Lagos State, for example, has something called the flood dashboard.
Okay.
That helps you to see, flood pattern over a period of time or to predict flood pattern in the country.
So even when you go to the NEMA, website, you see the dashboard that shows, the impact of flooding, the number of states that are flooded and all of that. So when you see some of this data, so one of the things that we really need is the collection of effective and efficient data. Data that speaks to what's happening, the reality, not foreign data. So, and I think that is one of the things that, in terms of maybe climate extreme weather events, Nigeria, NIMET has been able to. But where we are lagging is in terms of the dissemination of the early warning system to
people.
Most of the extreme weather events we experience in the country are usually people in the rural communities feel the brunt the more. But how do we get
it across to them?
This after we've used this technology in terms of weather data analysis, data sequencing, and all of that to gather the data, and then we've presented the data. How do we also take it to them based on recommendations that we got from the analysis?
And I know the young man in Kano, I struggle to remember his name right now, but he does what we can call a low-tech digital approach, where he collates the numbers of farmers in the rural area, and he has the system to send it to them as a text message to say, hey, it's going to rain in 3 days' time. You can begin to prepare to plant. Or there's not going to be rain for the next 5 weeks, so don't bother planning to plant. So that's like, we can call it low tech, but it's, to answer your question, it's one of the effective ways of reaching people at the rural area.
I also know of, sorry to cut, but I feel it's important to mention this. I know of these people they call the Sasankawa. It's a Janakawa. Yes, it's a Japanese, agri organization. They are in Abuja here, but most of their work, their headquarters in Kano. Okay, so they work with farmers to promote some of this climate smart technology. There was one that interested, what was it? They call it Bukashi. Very choice studies. So it helps to reduce emission from rice fields. Okay. So instead of them broadcasting the fertilizer on rice field as they used to do, there is a way they send it down into, and they get more yield from it, and also in terms of spacing of the seedling. So you see that technology that they introduced, and in fact, I was in Nasarawa to engage farmers that adopted some of these technologies. So they usually have a demo plots in some of these communities and ask farmers to look at it, to replicate it, and
inspiration.
And they get bountiful yield. There are reports about it. You get the point now. And there's also this other one of them trying to, should I say, digitalize extension workers, services. So they get extension workers, gather them, train them on some of these modern best agronomic practices, and then they give them tab when there is updated this thing on, maybe in agriculture. When they say you are supposed to plant in 5 centimeters, they're now planting in 20 centimeters, something. You get the different result. So when they're able to discover that, okay, you are to plant in this updated, they send it via this tab to the extension workers who communicate with. They also give them bike and also place them on stipend. to communicate it to the farmers across the different, communities and all of that.
I'll jump in here again. Still sticking with digital solutions and in the agri sector, you probably know of drone technology that helps with precision, right?
Yeah.
How does this work in practice?
So in terms of the drone technology as a whole, but the truth is, how many of our subsistence farmers can afford a drone in Nigeria? So that's where the government intervention comes in, because it helps them to even see far beyond. You can stand at a spot to dictate what's happening at a different region of the farm, and mostly maybe commercial farmers who is planting on over 150 hectares of land, and all of that. So they can stand at a spot with their drone. A drone moves around.
Yeah.
Maybe in terms of even pesticides, spray,
Exactly.
and also maybe if there's something happening in a particular region of the farm that helps them to dictate, send signal back. I know there's a particular professor that spoke about planting some sensors or something across the various parts of the farm. If the leaf of your maize that you plant is not doing well, he wants it to trigger. It will tell you that, look, at this part of the farm, this is what you should do. This is what we have that problem, but it's based in the US. So it's as if those good things we don't.
No, but to be honest, this is also around understanding best practices even outside of Nigeria. I'll tell you one, and I had the opportunity to lay my hands on it and to operate it. It's a drone system that can harvest trees. So instead of having the way we are, you want to get a particular tree in the middle of the forest, you have to clear about 500 trees to get to that one tree or the desired tree. But with this drone system, it is powerful enough to fly all the way up, identify the exact tree, cut it. Can you believe that? Cut it and raise it up and bring it out. Incredible. So I do believe that there are technology solutions that can help us really advance or reduce emissions or become more sustainable. But outside of the agri sector, as we sort of bring the conversation to a close, I could go on speaking with you for the next 30 minutes. But outside of the agri sector, I also know of EcoBata, for example, having this waste collection system that helps people to put in their plastics. Are there other solutions in other sectors that you want to very quickly touch on?
So I think an important thing we should not miss out is the carbon pricing. We talk about the carbon market, which was actually one of the big deal at COP. In Africa, we are trying to develop the carbon market where you can trade, emissions and all of that. But there are a whole lot of issues surrounding it where some people feel like when you introduce it, there is a false, they describe it as a false solution that could lead to land grabbing and all of that. So I feel but there are also arguments that if we are able to price our natural florals, very well, because we have them in abundance in Africa, we're going to be able to generate more revenue from it. But the issue now is for us to be able to follow the framework. If you follow the framework with integrity as adopted at COP, they actually parties endorse a standard for you to operate the carbon market. So carbon pricing is actually one technology that we are still developing in Nigeria. The act that established the Nigerian Climate Change Council actually stipulated that we're going to develop the carbon market. So we'll be able to, number one, in terms of climate finance, so we'll be able to execute some climate smart projects in the country and also be able to trade carbon, thereby reducing emission, where you have a cap that, okay, look, if you are operating in the oil and gas sector and you want to emit, you can't emit beyond this way. It's like you buying a recharge card. When you buy a card of 1,000, when it's exhausted, what do you need to do? You have to go back to buy another one. But our ability to develop that technology of the carbon trading and all of that, like a commodity trading of a thing, I think it's also what is in the pipeline. I look forward to it.
I look forward to it myself. We're running out of time. We're literally out of time. But you said something around we working with frameworks. But I just want to argue further that we should also be a part of designing these frameworks. Definitely that it's not just because
Those are one special need.
absolutely.
Yes, those are special needs.
If you could give one, if you could summarize this, or you could just inspire someone when it comes to reducing emission in Nigeria, what will that be?
So, for me, I think what we need to do as individuals, we have to be deliberate, we have to be intentional about sustainable environmental practices. When you are taking, if you have the way, get your solar, I know it's expensive. So we dump generator, use it, and all of that. When you drink your plastic bottle water, kindly dispose properly. Don't just throw it. Some people are driving their cars here, they drink like this, they just throw it. Yeah. All of these are non-biodegradable substances that have, they all have adverse effect on the environment, on the natural ecosystem, the species diversity of that region. So I encourage us all to embrace sustainable environmental practices as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, AbdulKareem. What a fun conversation it has been. Very enlightening too, as we talk about digital solutions that helps us to reduce emissions, particularly here in Nigeria. I've learned a lot from this conversation. I hope you've learned something new also, and that you can take with you this last bits of advice or recommendations from my guest, AbdulKareem Mojeed, veteran journalist, I would say. One of the if you're curious to learn about climate change, you can literally Google his name and you'd find out dozens and scores of articles that is written around trying to educate people. Also check out other episodes of Greenbytes Wednesday when we talk on different issues, from cloud computing, which are reflected on, to the energy sector itself, to solar energy, to mini grids, and we reflect on different themes when it comes to the environmental sector. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote, and it's been a pleasure hosting this episode of Greenbytes Wednesday. Check out the podcast wherever it is you find podcasts, on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, SoundCloud. You definitely will find Greenbytes Wednesday there also. Thanks to the UK government for making funds available for us to bring this to you, and for supporting the work that we do. Lastly, I want to say that Greenbytes Wednesday is a part of the Scale for Net Zero program. Our scale here is smart, climate, awareness, learning, and empowerment. Thank you for listening. Thanks to my team, Ajibola, Ayo, and Wonderful, and everyone else that makes this possible. We're grateful indeed. Till the next time, continue to do your bits to make the world a better place. Bye for now.
Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Greenbytes Wednesday. This podcast is brought to you by Area I under the Scale Initiative, thanks to funding from the UK government through the Digital Access Program. Have you learned something new? Please share with your network, share with your friends, as I look forward to hosting you on yet another episode of Greenbytes Wednesday next week. Follow us on our social media platforms, check out our courses, test yourself, see how much you know, how much you're learning when it comes to digital and sustainability ecosystem in Nigeria. And I should remind you that as you balance your knowledge of digital ecosystem, also remember to stay committed to a shared and sustainable planet. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote. Bye for now.